Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Austin Hannon from Clemson's 24/7 with us this morning to preview Saturday's big game, number 1 Georgia and number 14 Clemson. A lot to get into as we prepare for the season opener for both teams. And I'll throw it to you, Austin. How you doing this Wednesday morning as the countdown to the start of the 2024 season for the Bulldogs and the Tigers continues?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Back. Obviously, it drives the coverage on all these sites, and it's what we love to do. So I'm fired up, and yeah, it'll be good to be back in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I've covered a couple games there, and they do a really good job of being with hospitality, and it's a great environment, beautiful stadium. So yeah, excited to be back in Atlanta this weekend.
Yeah, it makes for a good time, and they definitely make the job easy for us. It's usually pretty easy getting up and down
Yep.
and getting all of our interviews. We love to see that. Well, we'll get into some questions about this Clemson team. I know Georgia fans are excited to see this matchup and to learn a little bit more about Clemson. And I'll shout out some of the folks on the Junkyard message board. I asked for some questions from them, have worked them in as well. To get a better understanding of this Tigers team. And we'll start kind of big picture, Austin. Clemson's coming off a 9-win season. They win the Gator Bowl with a comeback against Kentucky. What's the energy like around this program, getting ready for 2024 and trying to make some noise there in the ACC?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement. They're talking about this weekend. There's a big opportunity. Last year wasn't what anybody thought it was going to be. I think that there was obviously high expectations. They were a top 10 team for the 6th or 7th year in a row preseason. Obviously, things did not start well on that Labor Day against Duke. They go down there. They put up 400 or 500 yards of offense, but turn the ball over the red zone 2 or 3 times. Do this, do that. Don't play great on defense. They didn't seem like they were really at that point in the season well conditioned to play a game like that. And so I think that there's been a little bit of a shift in, hey, this year we're going to have to start the season a little better. So there's no way you can't. You're playing Georgia week 1. So if you don't show up and you play like you did in the first game last year, things aren't going to go well. But I think the expectation is what it normally is. Compete for an ACC championship, and obviously with the new playoff format, you win the conference, you get a first round bye as long as you're one of the highest ranked conference champs. So. The opportunity's there. It's just, can they go out there and take it? I think a lot of fans right now are kind of in like the prove me mode of, hey, these last 3 years, we've heard similar things in the preseason, and yet, we haven't made the playoff the last 3 years. So, is that going to be different this year? We'll see. But you're going to find out pretty quickly kind of what you've got on your team when you play a team like Georgia to start the season.
Looking at Clemson and starting with the offense, obviously there's a lot of attention around Kade Klubnik going into his second year as a starter. Now, I kind of want to look back to last season. Austin, what did you think of the job he did as a starter? What did you think he showed were his strengths, and what areas do you think he's working to get even better at in 2024?
Yeah, it looked kind of like a guy that was in his first year as a starting quarterback. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. I mean, he had a ton of success at the high school level. He won 3 straight, state titles in Texas. At a powerhouse high school. And so you come in with those high expectations of being a 5-star and, of course, with Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence and what they did as quarterbacks at Clemson, that high expectation is always there. And so when the last quarterback kind of flamed out, he moves on to Oregon State. Now he's at Florida State, of course. We're talking about DJ. They kind of said Cade's the guy. And after his first performance in Charlotte 2 years ago in the ACC championship when he won conference championship MVP, those expectations kind of got even magnified over the offseason. And then so when last season it didn't work out, and especially after they had just, signed Garrett Riley to a $1 million contract as one of the highest paid assistants in the sport, the expectation was that the offense would be like it was in the old days, and it wasn't. So for Kade Klubnik, it's more technical things than anything else. I think his decision-making, so what he's thinking in his brain each and every play, we saw just on several occasions last year, just plays where it's like, what are you doing? Like at the end of that game against Miami last year, when Dabo said they called a run play down at the goal line and he tried to keep it himself and get stopped and they lose the game. Like there were just situations where he didn't make the right decision or he tried to do too much when maybe a shorter pass was there. So going into year 2 of a system, I think a lot of guys have taken that next step. The offseason talk, as you would expect it to be for both players and coaches, is that he is taking that next step. He is looking more like the guy that they thought he would be out of high school. But now you got to prove it on the field. And who better to kind of get the opportunity to do that than Kirby Smart and his defense. So there's a lot of questions, and he's probably the most important player on this team this season. But you can kind of go from, hey, the national perception is that he's not a very good quarterback. Clemson's, gone and washed. But all it takes is one game. You play a certain way this Saturday, and all that stuff changes. So it is a huge opportunity for him. It's a huge opportunity for the whole team.
Yeah, and I imagine if you're going to play Georgia and that defense, as we know, it has been the last few years, you want to get them early and try to get them while they're still untested and breaking some things in. Clemson benefits from having Phil Mafah back, lead rusher from last season. What do you expect from him this season? And is there any other running backs you think are ready to kind of step up and play at that position alongside him?
Yeah, that's a big one. I think that's probably, other than, the starter at center, that's probably your big question mark on offense, which is not a huge one because, you have Phil Mafah. So it's not like he's not the starting running back and you have to worry about the guys. But it's more of the, hey, who's going to be the number 2 guy? Because obviously Will Shipley was around and he was really the number 1 guy, if you will. But I think a lot of fans, these last couple of years have watched Phil Mafah and said, is he not the best running back on this team? And obviously people love Shipley and he's, up there in the top 10 with yards and stuff in his career. And he's off in Philadelphia now, I think having a pretty good preseason with the Eagles, but now Mafah kind of gets his opportunity to take this backfield and by storm and kind of be the guy and get the 15, 20, 22 carries a game that he wasn't getting before because he was having to split. So the guys behind him, Keith Adams Jr. is the guy right now. His dad was a linebacker at Clemson back in the day. Pretty under the profile recruiting prospect, but a guy that they feel good about. His nickname's Hammerhead. He runs physically. He's a little bit of a shorter stature, thicker guy that on short yardage situations, obviously Mafah's also a big guy, so you'd probably keep him in there. But they're trying to figure out that balance of who's going to be the number 2 guy. You got Jay Haynes, who's more of a speed back, but he's dealt with injuries in his career. And they like this freshman, David Ezeumame, who was a 4-star in the class this past cycle. And he should be able to get some run as the season goes on. But it's going to be Mafah and everybody else. And, with the way Garrett Riley runs his offense, there will be plenty of passing. So I would assume most of the carries are going to go to Phil Mafah, but there will be some other guys that kind of mix and match in there.
You mentioned the center position, and I want to talk about offensive line and make sure to point out that Matt Luke, the former Georgia offensive line coach, is now with the Tigers. What have been your impressions of the job Matt has done so far and the line that he's going to work with in Clemson this year?
Yeah, it's hard to say, what job he's done so far, right? Because he's about to coach his first real game against Georgia. They let him step in right after they hired him in December to coach that bowl game against Kentucky. And the initial returns after that game were good. Clemson moved the ball. They scored almost 40 points. There were things that went well. And then this offseason, it sounded like that's one of the biggest revelations about this team and this staff is bringing Matt Luke on. I think it's been a little bit, not a lot of national attention, obviously, on it because it's just an offensive line coach, but he's got a great track record. And Kirby Smart talked about him the other day and said he was a great coach that we enjoyed having around. And obviously, he was the head coach at Ole Miss, and it didn't go well, but that was a difficult time for that program. And so now he's back in the game, and he liked the opportunity and the pitch that Dabo gave him to come join the Tigers staff. And things have been going, perfectly in terms of offensive line so far. If they, in terms of what they're expecting the future to look like, he's been recruiting well. There seems to be a different kind of mentality in this offensive line room. And they've got a couple guys at tackle that I think could play at the next level. And Blake Miller and Tristan Lay. Lay's a little bit more unproven, but played a lot last year and is going to have an opportunity to start at left tackle this season. So I think Clemson's not, known as, offensive line U. They're not going to be the team, the program that churns out these guys, but that could maybe start to change, with Matt Luke in there as the coach. And, he's going to get to he knows Georgia well. So it'll be a test for him against that front. And we'll see how his group responds in the first game.
The first word that Kirby Smart said when asked about a Matt Luke offensive line was toughness. And I think they understand they're getting ready to face that on Saturday. Before we move on from the offense to the defense, I want to talk about Clemson's skill players. They got 4 of their 5 leading pass catchers back from a year ago. Who are the names to know? Who are the guys that Georgia fans should pay attention to when Clemson's on offense?
Yeah, last year, at wide receiver, it was more of a who's on the injury report more than who's on the field. And they're hoping that kind of changes this year. Antonio Williams was the leading receiver as a freshman 2 years ago. He came back last year, was banged up most of the season, didn't get to play much, and now he's back fully healthy. And last year when he was out, Tyler Brown was the freshman that kind of did what he did the year before and became Clemson's leading receiver as a freshman last year. And then there's a guy like Adam Randall, who's a junior now that's been there for a while. Hasn't really lived up to those expectations he had as a high school prospect, but they're hoping that he can kind of fit into that top 3. And then I'm sure you've heard about it this offseason. Those 2 true freshmen that they brought in that 24 cycle, that being Bryant Wesco Jr. and TJ Moore, 4 and 5 stars respectively. Those guys, they are expecting to light this room up immediately, just about. More so for Wesco, I think. He was a spring enrollee, whereas Moore came in the summer. So he's got a little bit of that extra step that Moore maybe doesn't have yet. And you will see Wesco on Saturday featured plenty. I think he'll be on the field for the majority of the game, and especially in like 4 wide receiver sets. He's going to probably be that 4th guy that's out there after Randall, Williams, and Brown that I mentioned. And they got a guy like Troy Stalala. I mean, there's just a lot of receivers. Cole Turner, they call him the fastest player on the team. A lot of these guys have just dealt with injuries. And so if they're able to stay healthy, I think Clemson loves what they have at wide receiver, and not just wide receiver, but tight end. I mean, Jake Brenningstool's a 4th-year player. He's got a chance to break some records as a Clemson tight end this season. He's a little bit more of a pass guy. He's not the most reliable blocker, and I think that's something they've tried to work on, and it's going to be very important for him to be a good blocker against Georgia, but another guy that can hurt you in the passing game. So, Kade Klubnik's got the weapons at his disposal this year as long as they stay healthy. So I don't think that excuse is going to play much past this season if everybody does stay healthy.
Right. We'll take a quick break, come back, talk about the defense, and then turn our attention to this matchup and what we're watching for on Saturday. Austin, turn our attention to Clemson's defense. I think 2 guys that immediately stand out are on the defensive line, and TJ Parker and Peter Woods, guys that had really good freshman seasons. Have you seen strides with both of those guys as they get ready for this year? And who are some of the other names to know on that front this year?
Yeah, those are definitely the big 2 that people have talked about. I mean, they were giant recruits, and they came in last year, and it didn't take long for both of them to kind of get into the rotation and become the figureheads of that defensive line. And yeah, the expectations that they're going to just keep doing what they were doing last year. That's the hope. Obviously a sophomore slump is a pretty big thing in college football, but their hope is that these guys are going to come in and do what they did last year. Peter Woods, big guy. You're going to look at him on the depth chart. It's going to say 320 pounds. They moved him from inside to outside this spring. And you say, what? There's going to be a 320 pounder playing on the outside? Yes. So you will see that on Saturday. The guy's a freak. You'll hear Dabo Swinney call him that. He really is just built different. He's a guy that you're going to see him. You're going to say that guy's not 320 pounds. That guy's maybe 295. But he's fast. He can hit that edge. And that's kind of going to be an interesting storyline to watch, though, because you've heard in the practice that things have gone well, but how will it translate to the game and him playing that new position? But yeah, TJ Parker, a little bit of a different, player. He's less, big, bulky, stop the run, more, I'm going to get after the quarterback. But Georgia's been really good in the past at protecting Carson Beck. And so I want to see how they do against those outside tackles. But on the inside, Georgia's, dealing with the injuries at running back. I really like Clemson up front with DeMonte Capehart and Peyton Page. Those are 2 names you might not know yet, but they will be starting at defensive tackle on Saturday. And I think our future NFL prospects, both of them. So yeah, it's the Clemson Tigers. You're going to expect a good defensive line. They've churned out guys for a long time. They've got 2 of the best coaches on that front, and Chris Rumph and Nick Eason. So yeah, I think TJ Parker, Peter Woods, that's where you want to start, 11-3. But there's a lot of guys, and it's a deep room too. I think AJ Hoffler is another guy that if Clemson feels like, Peter Woods at defensive end is not maybe what they wanted him to be, they can move him back inside, and there's still some guys they could pull to play defensive end if that was the case. So it's gonna be fun to watch. These are 2 teams that they pride themselves up front in the scrimmage, at the line of scrimmage, and I'm excited to see it go down.
When you look at the rest of the Clemson defense, who are the names to know? Who are the guys that the Tigers expect a lot from this season?
Yeah, I would say really the name on the entire team probably that you're going to hear is like he is the guy on Clemson's team. It's Barrett Carter. He's been a 4-year player he's been here for a long time. He could have gone to the NFL. That route was there, but he decided to come back because he wanted to chase a national championship. And so he's going to be in the middle of the defense alongside Wade Woodaz. Obviously, they're missing Jeremiah Trotter, who's off to the NFL. So the expectation is that Woodaz is going to step in there at Mike and be able to play that position, without really any, downward trend from last year. So I think they're excited about that. There's a little bit of a question mark going on in the secondary right now. I think Avion Terrell, who is the younger brother of AJ Terrell, is going to be great. And he's Clemson's number one corner, lockdown. He's only a sophomore, but this is a name you're going to know by the end of the season. But after that, there was a little bit of a battle going on at the second corner position. And both those guys, that being Shelton Lewis and Jaden Lucas, are both game time decisions right now. And so, if neither of those guys are able to go, I think the expectation right now is that Lucas can play. We'll see about Shelton Lewis, but if neither of those guys are able to go, it's going to be true freshmen in there at the second cornerback position. So that could be a little bit of an issue. We know that Georgia's got good receivers. At nickelback, you're going to see a guy named Khalil Barnes, another true sophomore. I mean, that's kind of the story of this team, and especially this defense, is that sophomore class that they've got right now is loaded with playmakers, especially, like I said, on the defensive end. And I think Khalil Barnes is another one of those. So on the back end, RJ Mickens, fifth-year senior. He knows what he's doing back there. He's been around for a long time. I think they're pretty confident in his ability. He's moved around in his career, but their plan with him this season was, hey, you're going to play safety for us, and we're not going to really move you around this year. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that secondary if those guys aren't able to go that I mentioned. But it's a pretty talented Clemson defense on paper, and I expect it to be pretty good like it has been for years.
Focusing on this matchup between Clemson and Georgia, is there an area of this Clemson team where, looking at the matchup, you say, I really like this for Clemson? They have a chance. If they're going to hang around and have a chance to win this game, this is where they need to win the battle.
Yeah, I think it's Kade Klubnik going against that Georgia secondary. And I think it's, can Georgia run the ball against that defensive front without their two best options? Potentially. Obviously, we don't know the status of ETN yet, but it's kind of sounding like he's not going to play. And so if that's the case, they're going to be on a third string running back, which we know Georgia's loaded. They're all 4 and 5 stars behind them on the bench. But can they run the ball? And if they can't, that's going to kind of put a lot of pressure on Carson Beck. And then on the other side, like I said, yeah, if Kade Klubnik can show that he has the ability to take shots downfield and kind of keep that Georgia defense on the field, wear out that secondary, then start getting the ball to Phil Maffa, which is a guy you don't really want to tackle in the third and fourth quarter. This could become a 15-minute game in the fourth quarter. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think that those are the two areas they like a lot. But when you're dealing with a guy like Carson Beck, like I said a minute ago, and if you got two potential starters out at corner and you're going against maybe the number one quarterback drafted in April, that could be a problem. So there's matchups and mismatchups on both sides. And I think that once we see who's going to play and who's going to be available, it'll be a lot easier to tell on Saturday.
To kind of piggyback off of that, Austin, besides those two corners, are there other injury issues you guys are watching, situations to keep an eye on going into Saturday?
Yeah, not really. And that has been the huge silver lining through this camp for Dabo Swinney. And one of the biggest positives has been his team has stayed pretty healthy, which has not happened over the last few years. Troy Stellato is a receiver that's going to get in there a lot this year, but he's dealing with a little something. He's been banged up most of his career. And I'm sure you know the name Vic Burley, defensive tackle. He's a young guy, so he's not really in the starting lineup, but he's also been dealing with kind of rehabbing from a knee surgery he had after last year. So those are two lesser guys, not as important just because their names aren't going to be as called, early on in the game as maybe those corners would be. So pretty healthy, and that's a good thing to be in week one.
Definitely. And a lot of teams across this country cannot say that.
No.
So that is definitely a good situation for Clemson. Austin, what's been the conversation this week just getting ready for Georgia? What has Dabo been saying? What have the players been saying? Understanding that this is going to be a big-time matchup on Saturday.
Yeah, they respect Georgia a lot. And I think the conversations kind of started talking about week one in this game back when they were in Charlotte for media days. And the word that just keeps being said, then, now, it's opportunity. That's the word. And I think it's a perfect word because I've kind of described this game to our readers more or less over the last few months as it's a barometer game, right? It's what do we have in week one? The sport's not what it has been. It's not a 4-team playoff. It's not a 2-team BCS title. It's a 12-team playoff. So you kind of got to play the long game in this sport these days and expect, the players have talked about, hey, we got to have our bodies right to play 16 or 17 games perhaps this season if it gets to that point. And so, that's been a big emphasis for Clemson, and the opportunity to play Georgia in the first week of the season could be a couple different things, right? It gives you the opportunity to upset the number one team in week one for the first time since 1990. It hasn't been done. And it also, on the other hand, if things don't go well and you play like you did in the season opener last year, you got a sour taste in your mouth for the last 11 weeks of the season. Maybe, if you can't kind of get, a blowout out of your mind after week one, like we've seen Georgia do to teams in the past. So yeah, if you can keep the game close, obviously winning the game is what the fans and the team wants to do. But if you could keep the game close, show that you've made strides in areas that you haven't been good at in recent years, I think there will be plenty of positives to take away, because this isn't an unmanageable schedule by any, they've got winnable games on the schedule. They play NC State at home. They don't have Miami on the schedule this year. Obviously you got a trip to Tallahassee later down the road, but what do they got in Tallahassee after what we saw last week? So they're the odds on favorite to win the conference now after that game happened. So I think the opportunity to play the top team in the country is what they're focused on. But at the same time, I don't think they're going into it saying, hey, we can't beat Georgia. Let's just try to keep it close. Like our friends at 24/7 Sports put out the team talent, rankings the other day, and Clemson's right there at number 5. So this is a game that they're going to go in expecting to win, and we'll see what happens. If they keep it close, I think there'll be a lot more positive vibes around campus moving forward.
Definitely. You can tell Clemson's got something to prove, and they've got the playmakers on both sides to be able to do it. Austin, I want to ask you, I always feel like on these preview podcasts, we have these guests on, we want the experts giving us the info on the other team, but, it's usually me sitting here listening to the other person talk and talk and talk. So I want to ask you, do you have questions about Georgia? Anything that stands out to you that maybe I can shine some light on?
Yeah, just I would start with offensive line. I think that's been a thing I've read about because there's a little bit some moving parts, right? They obviously lost Van Pran. Just kind of the plan there at offensive line this year.
Yeah, the biggest thing is just getting Jared Wilson back healthy. He missed a little bit of time. I believe it was Achilles tendonitis during fall camp, but he's been back, and he's a guy that he slots right in. They've got 4 starters back at the other position, so they feel good about that. And Jared Wilson's a guy that Kirby Smart has really, really spoken highly of, a guy that Kirby said is faster than some of the DBs. Every DB we've talked about since then have basically been like, that's not true.
No. Right.
But to even say that, I mean, I hear he is very athletic. He can move and get to that second level. So I think this offensive line is going to be a strength. And, what we heard out of some of Georgia's scrimmages this offseason during fall camp specifically was how tough and how physical that offensive line is. So as you talked about a few minutes ago, we still don't know as of Wednesday morning Trevor Etienne's status. So you might get some younger backs, and you probably will get some younger backs in action on Saturday. So to have that offensive line opening up holes, trying to make it easier for them, I think that's going to be huge. And I think that they're going to get tested out of the gates. And I give a lot of credit to some of the folks on our board saying, this may be the toughest front that Georgia faces all year. Now, there's going to be some tough ones down the road, but this Clemson one is going to be very good. And this line doesn't have the luxury of a cupcake in week one to try to figure things out. They're going to be tested. I know Clemson's going to get after them.
Yeah, I would say my other question, other than Everett and Starks back there in the secondary, it's a lot of young guys, a lot of talented young guys, obviously. But are they ready for a game of this magnitude in week one?
I think that's going to be a huge question. And I think it's going to be a situation where, some of those battles I really think are ongoing. I think that Daniel Harris is going to start at the cornerback spot opposite of Dalen Everett, but he's got Julian Humphrey, another guy that has been around for quite a while, breathing down his neck. So he doesn't, Daniel Harris, if he starts, doesn't have the luxury of saying, all right, I got this job. He's going to be tested. And, we kind of talked about this on the CBS Sports HQ previewing this game. That I think the secondary is going to make or break Clemson's chances. If Kade Klubnik can make big plays on a secondary that has some proven starters, like you mentioned, Malachi Starks and Dalen Everett, but it's going to have some guys that are, going against live bullets for the first time. And there's going to be mistakes, and there's going to be issues, and Clemson's going to have their opportunities. But, there's a lot to like, I think. And, I imagine it's going to be Daniel Harris at the other cornerback spot, Jonell Aguero at the star. He's a sophomore. And then Dan Jackson, a super senior, a former walk-on, has done a tremendous job. And I think a lot of people had kind of written in KJ Bolden, true freshman, he'll start right away. Dan Jackson's done a very good job. And the fact that he's got that experience, I think that sets him up well. And Yeah, I mean, secondary, I'm going to be watching them closely because if Clemson's going to make this thing interesting, they're going to have to find ways to make plays on those guys.
And then lastly for me, weapons on offense. Obviously, we got so accustomed to seeing Brock Bowers, Lad McConkey, even Ra Thomas, of course, who was kicked off the team recently. Dylan Bell, I mean, love it. These guys are good players, but last year when Bowers and McConkey were hurt, there were some struggles on offense in that passing game. Is that still a concern?
I think they've got to prove it. I mean, I think that you look at those two guys specifically, Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett, those are very clearly going to be the top pass catchers. I'd probably put Oscar Delp right behind them, the new starting tight end now that Brock Bowers is gone. But, I felt like in that Alabama game, if you go back and watch that loss, they just had issues getting separation, getting open. And I think, Brock Bowers, best tight end Georgia's ever had, people are going to lose sight of how valuable Lad McConkey was and just Lad's ability to get open. And when he got open catching the ball and being slippery and being able to turn, what might have been a 10-yard catch into a 40-yard catch. So seeing those guys, I think they're capable. They also got Colby Young from Miami, a guy that got a lot of excitement and drew a lot of buzz this offseason. He'd been dealing with a hamstring injury in fall camp, but it sounds like he's going to be ready to go. But yeah, I mean, I think that those guys have to understand they have to step up. I mean, they made plays last year, Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett both. And I thought Dylan Bell was especially impressive toward the end of the season. But they've got to prove that this offense can keep chugging along. I think they feel good about their options. But again, they're going to be thrown into the fire in week one, and we're going to have to see if they're ready for it. Well, Austin, looking at Saturday's game, all right, let's say that we're having this conversation on Sunday, and let's say that either Clemson won this game or they made it a 4-quarter battle. They made it really close. In your opinion, what has to happen for that to happen, for Clemson to have a chance in this game on Saturday?
Yeah. Well, Dabo said yesterday, this Georgia team, you're not going to expect them to beat themselves most of the time, right? Over this 3, 4, 5-year run they've been on. They're smart with the football. They don't make a lot of mistakes on either side of the ball. You kind of got to go in there and just play the better football game than they do. With a couple those losses to Alabama, though, going back and watching those, Alabama wins the turnover battle. I think that's massive. I think that's massive in any football game, obviously. And you'll hear football coaches say that across the country. But I think it really is in this case, just because of, Georgia does not usually do that. Clemson last year did that all the time. And that's a reason that they lost a lot of the games. And so if that trend continues, I don't think Clemson has a chance in this game. But if they're able to flip that and either, keep it even in the margin or win the margin, I think that opens things up for them to win this game. Obviously, other things will have to go well too, which I think they're going to have to run the ball because if you're going against a defense like Kirby Smart puts out there, if you can't run the ball, they're going to say, okay, you can't run the ball, so now we're going to blitz the quarterback. We're going to make we're going to make it extremely hard on him, and that's not what you want Cade Klubnik to have to go against, which is a bunch of disguised blitzes against Kirby Smart the first game of the season. So if you can start running the ball, open up other things, throwing the ball down the field, taking a couple shots. We talked about Georgia's secondary maybe being a concern and that can make plays. If you can do that, this might be a ball game. And I think that maybe Clemson's getting a little overshadowed in this game. If you look around the country and the predictions and, not on a national scale, not a lot of people think that they're in contention to make a playoff. But in terms of this week, not a lot of people giving them a chance. I mean, even if you look at Vegas, a 2-touchdown underdog in a neutral site game, we call it a neutral site game, obviously. The expectation is there will be more. I've been in the building for a Georgia game. There will be more Georgia fans there than Clemson fans, but I don't think it'll be by that much. It's not too far for fans of Clemson to get there, and I think the fans are excited. I think I saw something the other day that said the allotment was supposed to be pretty much 50-50. Obviously, things can change on the secondary market if Clemson fans start selling their tickets. But I don't think the environment's going to be the same as it would be if it was at Sanford Stadium, like in those highlights they were showing on the CBS Sports Network thing. But yeah, you can't make the game be too big. You got to do the little things too. You got to make 35-yard field goals. Obviously, Clemson just named a true freshman as their starting kicker yesterday. He was the number 1 kicker in the 2024 cycle, according to 24/7 Sports, that being Nolan Hoosier, but he doesn't have any game experience. He did win the battle. So on the first drive, if Clemson's got a 4th and 7 from the 35, do they kick a field goal? Do they punt? Do they go for it? Those kind of decisions will be very important. And then just keeping the offense on the field, even if it doesn't result in points. having a drive that goes 5-6 plays and then a punt that flips the field. Those kind of little things can change a game when you're playing somebody as good as Georgia. So, it goes the whole opposite other way too. If you don't do the little things well, you turn the ball over, you have no chance to win this game against a team like Georgia. So they got to do the little things. They've got to make the explosive plays that they haven't in years past. And if they do those things, I mean, we could be talking about a pretty crazy storyline come Saturday evening.
Yes, crazy things can happen, especially in week one. That's for sure. Well, Austin, I'm going to put you on the spot. How does this game play out in your opinion, and what do you think the final score is going to be?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out the points, how many points are going to be scored in this game, because I look at the defenses and I'm like, man, like when you think about Clemson and Georgia, like you just assume that, like, I know there's question marks on both sides, but like the guys coaching those defenses, you assume they're going to be pretty good. And so you assume the points will be low. I don't expect it to be 10-3 like it was a couple years ago. I think there's way too much firepower on both sides. The quarterbacks are better. That's to begin with it. But I think Georgia wins this game. It's hard for me to put a Clemson upset on the spot. I do think they have a better chance than a lot of folks are giving them credit for. I do think this will be a fourth quarter game if Clemson does the things that I've been talking about they need to do. Otherwise, we know that Georgia has the ability to blow just about anybody out of the water on any given Saturday. But I'll go Georgia in a close one. I had a different score. I think when I did a season prediction on the site last week, I said 34-24. I'll back off on a little bit of the points there. I'll say Georgia 27-21.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get a good gauge on this, especially after you look at that Florida State Georgia Tech game. They had 7
Yep.
possessions apiece, so it's kind of hard to nail down the numbers. And I want to run through our predictions, which we'll also have on Dawgs 24/7 on Friday. I've got Georgia 30-17. Kip Adams has Georgia 31-17, and Ben Wolk has Georgia 34-17. So we've got the clean sweep. But I do think it's going to be a very good game. Austin, I really appreciate you popping on. I want to make sure and give you the opportunity. Plug anything you got, and looking forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Yeah, just if there are any Clemson fans watching interested in the game this weekend, hop on over to our site at Clemson 24/7. We got a lot of stuff going. We got a fun message board. You know how those things can get on a game day. So it'll be very exciting. I know a lot of people are ready to go, regardless of what they're expecting to happen. Everybody's happy that football's back in both Athens and Clemson. And I'm right there with them, and I'm sure you are too.
Absolutely. Ready to be at Mercedes-Benz on Saturday. Well, we'll wrap up the episode right there. Thanks to everyone who watched us live, everyone who is watching or listening after the fact. Be sure to go to Dawgs247.com, go to Clemson247.com. Make sure and subscribe. It is game week. We are super excited. Make sure and go to Dawgs247 on YouTube, on TikTok. Got all kinds of videos. We are ready to get this thing rolling. So for Austin Hannon, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.